Good morning. My name is Heather, and I will be your conference operator today. At this time, I would like to welcome everyone to the CA APM Global User Community Webcast. All lines have been placed on mute to prevent any background noise. After the speaker's remarks, there will be a question and answer session. If you would like to ask a question during this time, simply press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. To withdraw your question, press the pound key. Thank you. I will turn the conference over to Mr. Keith Palmer. Mr. Palmer, you may begin.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to today's APM Global User Community Webcast. My name is Keith Palmer, Vice President of the APM Global User Community. I'm accompanied by our President, Manish Parikh, and fellow Vice President, JP Gagan, also Mayor Greening from CA. I have just a couple of quick announcements. This webcast is being recorded and will be posted on the community archives. Also, if you have any questions during the presentation, please don't ask in the WebEx chat panel. Please ask your questions in the QA panel in the WebEx. This presentation will take about 20 minutes, and there will be an open mic for our community members to openly ask questions after the presentation. We appreciate all the activity on the message boards. Thank you for your participation. One more announcement, we have our next webcast in September, and that topic will be for the CA Productivity Accelerator. Today, we have an exciting topic for you focused around CA support, how to engage support, and also the top 3 Introscope and CEM issues. Hal German will be presenting. Again, if you have any questions, please don't ask in the chat, ask in the QA panel on the WebEx. Hal will be answering your questions at the end of the session. Lastly, please take a moment at the end of the presentation for a quick survey. It's a great way to get your voice heard. Hal, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Keith. Just in the process of sharing the desktop. So hopefully you can see the slides.
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So brief introduction, I was a CA customer, and in thinking about what was needed, I wanted to give a presentation that really talks about how we can better interact in terms of support and as customers to try to get cases resolved quicker and perhaps smoother cases as we go along. So the agenda for today, I'll be giving a brief technical support overview. I'll be providing places to look for information before opening the case. I'll be going over 2 themes that I've seen looking through the cases, and been going over the top 3 APM Introscope support cases that come in, and the top 3 APM customer experience. And we'll be having questions. I want to thank my colleagues who looked over the content and provided input into this. This presentation would not include as much material and be as complete without their input. And I want to thank VJ today because he will be assisting and answering in the Q&A during this entire call. So let's get into the support overview. The APM Technical Support Organization has the follow-the-sun worldwide staff that assists on production down issues, and it's also a continuous improvement organization. There are a lot of ongoing efforts in terms of trying to improve the process to make it as seamless for customers as possible. We are your advocates among many for the product. There's a lot of sessions going on with engineering, development, documentation to try to anticipate what you would ask for in terms of those areas and to provide better tools for troubleshooting, clearer documentation, etc. And also for people. We welcome your feedback that you've been providing on surveys, and from that we get great insight in terms of how to better offer and even improve customer experience in the future. And we're a learning organization. Each engineer, when they come in from the beginning, has a curriculum that's very involved that they have to go through and keep up, so they learn the products inside and out. In terms of cases, the mentality is trying to think beyond the case and reach the end goal for each and every customer of a stable, scalable environment. And as we're going through cases, we try to point out other issues that are being seen, so it goes beyond just the issue that the case was open for, and try to promote best practices that have been used very successfully at other APM sites. I don't think I've seen this in this way anywhere before, but when support gets a case, these are the sort of questions that are in their mind that they're trying to answer. So, having this list, keep this in mind, are these questions being asked? And this is the information. By having this, it's going to likely speed up the resolution. So very early on, it's trying to determine if it's a new issue, a recurrence of an old issue, and more importantly, when did it last work? The frequency of the problem is very important. If it's a new or an old environment, what happened before the issue took place? Was there an install, an upgrade, a migration, a reboot, whatever? And determining, very important, is what's the scope? Are there one or more clusters involved, multiple environments? Is it affecting only some agents or EMs or servers, etc., or all of them? Very quickly trying to learn about what are the specifics of the environment and see, are there any key error messages in the logs, determining what are false positives, what are real error messages to focus on, and in terms of the idea of thinking beyond the ticket, what are the performance characteristics? So looking at the memory, the CPU, connections at the time, and tying this with a sense of event correlation. So what's going on in the agent logs, does that match what's going on in the collector logs, and with the various screenshots. There are a variety of factors that could delay case resolution. So incomplete or incorrect information. The information, if it's incorrect, obviously is going to lead down the wrong trail. If you have multiple environments and you send information about the incorrect environment, that could lead to delays. One common thing is that you have one case, but there's multiple issues in it. It's an open-ended case. So it's prioritizing those and trying to provide answers to those can take time to go through. Questions were previously posed, but the answers were not received, so that could take time. Also, delays in terms of case updates, trying to get a WebEx scheduled. And unfortunately, sometimes there's WebEx sessions and just the support engineer is on the line listening to the silence. It's very important that if an event took place, try to get the logs and files from that same time period on all the different servers so we can do event correlation. Sometimes customers can't reproduce an issue. It happened once and that's it. It could be also delays in terms of implementing any suggested changes because they have to go through change controls and review the change, talk about the implications, etc. Any delays in terms of implementing changes because the change freezes, etc. The complexity of the case, or if it happens infrequently. And sometimes there is some functionality that's desired, but it's only available through enhancement. So the ideation link is a good place to add any desired enhancement requests. And the last thing on this list would be, it could be related to something that's custom code that's going to require a professional service engagement. So here's some information about where to look before you open a ticket. As you probably know, there is the community mailing list, which has some great information on it, and support is getting more involved in terms of answering questions on that. There's the document library that's a wealth of resources, including the community documents, which has best practices been created by myself and others. Each week you have the Tuesday tips, which should also be in time added to the knowledge base. And other folks created different time frames. For me personally, I create one once a month. I'm due for one this week. So next week I'll have one out there. And also at the top of the month, there's an APM top 10, and now changed it to top 20 access articles and documents for the previous month. So recently added under product news when you log into support.ca.com are these two links. And if you look at it, it's really the top 20 useful KV articles when that are typically accessed, both for Introscope and CEM. And I put the link here for Introscope. So the knowledge base, one of the open secrets is that there's a major initiative underway to greatly increase the KB content. It's not your grandparents' KB system anymore. Each engineer is on the hook to produce one quality KB article a week, and that article is reviewed technically and also by the approver as well to make sure, is it clear? Does it address your needs? Does it say what particular cases that applies for? And even in spite of that, there's very fast turnaround to get this in place. Sometimes as quick as 24 hours. There's the link for it, and I've listed some of the more recent ones. So if the data is updated that frequently, please keep going back to that space to check for updates. Further down on that same page, you can see recommended reading, and again, you'll see the top 20 knowledge documents for CEM and EM, other useful things to look at there, and product status. So if you want to know about the roadmap and something about hot fixes, all that's included on those pages. And when you open a case, there is a link available. It was formerly called CADCF. It was just recently renamed to Remote Engineer. And this is a tool provided by CA to help automate the process to gather the logs, save you time in terms of typing, and it's available for some of the popular Unix and Windows platforms. So what are some of the common themes that are seen in cases? One that I actually saw in my first week in support that was on a case is fast-growing environments. Architecture and configuration changes are just not keeping up with the pace because additional applications are being monitored and servers are kind of added reactively. As a result of this, there's just a lot of data and it's not necessarily being cleaned up. So from the CM side, you may have a lot of defects. Introscope, you may have far too many metrics you're getting. And as a result of this, you're also getting a lot of errors in the logs. And if you're in a fast-changing environment, you probably don't have a lot of time to look at the logs to address these issues. And this can kind of impact things when you're looking at a log, trying to figure out an issue to see what are the messages you should focus on. Well, if there are a lot of other messages, it takes time to kind of go through and to read that. And a very important note, as your environment grows, proactive performance tuning is very important. CA offers health checks both for the EM and CEM environment that will help you determine how healthy is going on and hopefully avoid future tickets. The other area is suboptimal and unsupported environments. So one thing that I've seen is when you look at cases and somebody reports an issue, if you go back to the logs, you probably find it back much earlier than it's reported. There's cases where people are running older releases where it's not fixed in that release, but it is fixed in a later release. Another thing that's one of the first things that should be checked is, are the versions of software for the various components compatible with each other? So checking the compatibility guide is one of the first things we do, and if that's not the case, we let you know that. If you're running a 32-bit Java version instead of a 64-bit, then you may have slower performance. Particularly helps for such things as the tin collector. And sending dirty data or too much data to a TIM or EM could affect what's going on there. One thing is, it's what I call the kitchen sink server. It seems to be how much can you throw on a particular server to run. So you may see a MOM, multiple collectors, a database, and maybe a third-party application, and it's all running on this one server, and it's clearly suffering. Seeing a lot of cases that the performance and sizing guidelines are not being followed, and those guidelines, just to let you know, get a lot of input from you and what is deployed in the field. So it is real-world performance and sizing guidelines. It's not just from the lab. Maybe perhaps also not looking at the latest README to see if an issue is already known. And just want to point out an old article in Computer World where it was called When Cheap is Expensive. And it talks about what are the implications of maybe saving in terms of money on disk space or memory or what have you, but in the long term, it may come back to bite you. So let's talk about the top 3 Introscope issues that support Cs. Number 1, which could be a whole day lecture on, would be Introscope performance. There is a nice Tuesday tip just on this topic. And the way it manifests itself is the environment is too slow, metrics are incomplete, there's gaps in the metrics. It could also be seen as other ways, such as clamping, the performance on doing anything in the investigator is really slow, or just some other symptoms. So what are the sort of things that you should look at? In terms of the clocks, are they skewed in terms of the collector and the MOM? Looking in the logs and seeing are there messages about the message queue's limit being reached? And such things in terms of performance. Is the collector responding too slow? Looking again at the architecture, seeing if clamping is occurring, see if it's network related, are the boxes overloaded, and how often are agents connecting and disconnecting, reconnecting. Also check if there's a custom load balancing being used, because if it's properly configured, then you could have a collector all of a sudden get much more agents than it's able to load. So possible quick fixes. Add the following setting in the MOM and the collectors and then restart the EMs. One of the popular ones is increasing the message queue size on the outgoing message. Changing the Isengard high concurrency pool min and max sizes. Also, it's very common to look and see that the heap size is just too small and that it runs out of heap when looking at the perf log. So one thing that is not always set, even though it's in the documentation, is that the initial heap size, the -XMS, should equal the maximum heap size, the XMX. And note that this may or may not help your situation, but at least it should be explored. Increase your clamp size, clean up the metrics, prove any network latency, review your architecture, ideally on a quarterly basis, so you're being more proactive rather than reactive. And if you do have a MOM and a collector overloaded, that seems a good investment in time in terms of figuring out why that is and trying to resolve that. Now, there is a website that came out that's all about APM performance tips. So you can look here, and see which particular situation applies to you and gather additional information. Issue number 2 is the agent memory leak. So the symptoms are the memory footprint increases over time. Things to check is what the PVL is being used. Is full being used instead of typical for your particular application server? And are you using the reduced agent memory overhead or not? Are there custom PBDs, or is third-party software being used? Particular releases have memory leak issues, so check the release notes and see if the Introscope AutoProbe Deep Inheritance Enable is true, which may be impacting the memory. Different Java JRE versions and vendors could be impacting things. And the tracers that you're using. Various tracers could impact memory, such as sockets and network tracers. If you upgraded from Introscope 9.1 and use mixed mode, then that could also be impacting it as well. So in the possible quick fixes, changing your Java JRE version, possible vendor. On your JVM startup arguments, changing from -Java agent to XBoot class path, disabling the deep inheritance enabled if it's impacting. And this is in part to just determine what is causing the leak, and then you can always go back and see what additional steps you can do. But this is just the quick steps to do. Remove any unneeded PBDs, any custom PBDs. As I mentioned earlier, disable tracers using high memory, such as the network file system and the toggle GL. And also disable the SQL agent, disable GMX collection, and any impacting extensions, such as change detector. And the last Introscope issue is the load balancing is not working. So it could be the agent's connecting to the wrong collector. The cluster is frequently unbalanced, and you're seeing an agent but in the EM, but it's not showing up on the workstation. So again, check if it's performance related, depending if you made a change to load balancing the XML, waiting the 60 seconds to see what's going on, redoing your load balancing XML configuration, see if it's correct, looking at the Introscope Enterprise Manager at load balancing intervals, see how often the rebalancing takes place. And if the agent's not showing up in the workstation, it could be in disallowed mode, which would not report any metrics. So that's something to check as well. Something that was added in 9.1 is the agent controllability feature. And so there could be issues in terms of how that's configured, but the advantage of doing this is that you can now restart the components anytime you need. Agents can be disconnected, they can be stopped for sending data, and they can be dynamically redirected to other collectors. So there's a lot of power there in terms of what it does. Looking at the key settings could impact things. So in terms of the agent control, agent allowed, if it's set to false, then it's going to be using the load balancing.xml. EM lists are very important for the agent control. So whether or not it's going to be using the collector list only or the list that's also included in the standalone EM. The disallowed connection limit, you can set how many agents that are going to be disallowed, and then depending when that limit is hit, you can then determine when an agent is reconnected. So let's talk about the top 3 CEM issues. And this could be issue 1, 2, 3, 5, whatever. There's just a lot on TIM. And there can be TIM restarts every couple of seconds or minutes. Logs are filled with all sorts of errors going on, not seeing traffic or seeing too much traffic, and it could be SSL issues. So the TIM logs are your friends, and also the configuration. They give you a lot, especially if you turn on the various trace options, they give you a lot of help in determining what's going on. Determining if you're getting too much data, which may be involved with the restart, or you're not, you're having issues because of filtering. somebody made a change on the system, so it's filtered out the particular web server that you're interested in. Network quality is very, very important for TIM. TIM is just highly dependent upon the quality of the data that's being sent to it. And you can see that in terms of the out-of-order packet messages and some of the other messages that you get. As I mentioned about, see if there's filtering in place and if there's filtering on the span tap aggregator, if it's on the web server side, or with an NTP would be the hardware filter. If you have an NTP, you should use the hardware filters and not the web server filters. And there could be issues as well with SSL private keys, namely it's the incorrect key or the incorrect passphrase, or the cipher suite that's being used. Diffie-Hellman is not supported, but it's tolerated. And the TLS version, currently, if you use, you may get a bad data message, and that could be due to the TLS version. Some possible quick fixes. Check your filtering. Check in terms of how much data you're sending. Make sure you have the right private key and everything else is correct on the SSL side. The traffic quality, see what you can do to improve that. And that's very important in terms of also eliminating false positives, because that could impact if you're getting missing responses and partial responses. Increase the TIM watchdog memory, but you should probably talk to support before you do this. If you're getting a lot of SSL age-out error messages, changing these TIM settings. Issue number 2 is once you're able to see the traffic is I want to be able to record the traffic. So again, make sure, is it showing up on the network side? And pretty much every issue with CEM always goes back to, is it going through on the network? If it's showing up in the TCP dump, then the next thing to do is it showing up in the TIM logs? If it is, you pretty much should be able to record. And you want to make sure that you're seeing both the request and the response, the two-way traffic. You want to make sure that you have the correct HTTP headers attached, so it has the language header and it knows the content type. And that the content type is defined in the test default or customer properties. There could be issues in terms of you don't have the same IP address throughout the entire session. It could be going to other servers. And so you might not see the response because of that. If you're recording, just make sure that you start with the clean cache, start with a new browser window, and turn off the web page caching. Sometimes just waiting is helpful too. It may not show up until you stop the recording. It may take 40 seconds to a minute for it to actually show up. And the other thing is, as I've listed here in the last bullet, this is how you would add the particular content types and extensions so you should be able to record it. And once you've made this change to the test default or customer properties, restart your collector after changing it. So I've already talked about test default customer. Again, you know, the quality of the network data is very important. Making sure you're seeing a round trip is very important. When in doubt, try different recording mechanisms. So there's a variety that you can do. The transaction discovery, if you didn't use that and you were using the advanced recorder. Try it from a different desktop or a different IP subnet or different browser. And one thing that I often see is that people try recording production. If you have the same transaction in a non-production environment, gain experience there, and it's much easier to go through logs in a non-production environment to figure out what's going on. And you might not be able to record again because of SSL. And the key is that you've hit a transaction multiple times and it's not showing up in the logs. And it's SSL related, would probably be due to private keys. And the last issue you're going to talk about is not seeing any or all defects reports. There's a lot of cases that come in about this. The first thing that typically would check is, has this issue happened for a long time? Typically the answer is yes, but people would report about it maybe a little bit later than when it's discovered. Is the data backing up on the TIM? So in the SC Wiley CEM TIM data out directory, you're going to find BT stats, the stats, and the defects. So you could go there and see if there's a lot of files. And also talked about the networking issues. If it's happened for a long time, then perhaps the partitions are not being cleaned up, so there could be a possible running out of disk space issue to deal with. So keep that in mind as well. The obvious thing is the defect enabled in the first place? So is it enabled at the business transaction level and at the business service level? And then check, you can run a SQL query to see when the last daily table was updated. You may get a value of 0 or blank, which would mean that it possibly has never been updated at all. Then the next thing I would check is when it was the hourly data, which would be a INT table, is what it would end with, was last updated. Is it possible the TIM is overloaded, not doing its job? Maybe using a 32-bit GRE is not working. It could be that there's different versions or incompatible versions between the EM and the TIM. And maybe there's database connectivity issues that need to be looked at. So some possible quick fixes. Talked about updating the last aggregated row. Support can help you out on that. Sometimes just something simple as restarting the collector will kick the TIM in gear, get the defects off the TIM, and you'll start seeing the information. In releases 9.14 through 9.16, the Java version changed, so the thread stack size needs to be increased to at least 256 or possibly 512. If you're getting a bad rows error message in the log, that's perhaps due why. And again, look at the EM and the database performance settings. So at this point, Heather, I'd like to open up the lines for questions.
Thank you. As a reminder, if you would like to ask an audio question, please press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. We'll pause for just a moment to compile the roster. There are no audio questions at this time.
Okay. So we do have a little bit of time. Is there any brief topic that that someone would like to ask about or talk about in terms of what you're seeing in terms of APM deployments or fast-growing environments? Okay, well, if there's no other questions, then I believe we're set for today, and I want to thank you all for joining.
Thank you so much, Hal.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you for your participation in today's conference call. You may now disconnect.